David woke up before sunrise as he did every morning. His small apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the distant sounds of traffic outside. He rubbed his eyes and swung his legs off the bed, feeling the stiffness in his knees from the long hours he had worked the day before. Life was hard, but David had long learned to move forward without complaints. There was always work to do, bills to pay, and dreams that seemed just out of reach. He shuffled to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of cheap instant coffee. It wasn't much, but it was enough to wake him up and give him the energy to face the day. On the small kitchen counter, a crumpled list of groceries and bills reminded him of how tight money was. The last $50 in his wallet had to last him the entire week. He sighed, thinking about the food he could barely afford and the rent that was due soon. Still, he knew he had no choice but to keep going. David worked as a cleaner in several office buildings around the city. His job was exhausting, but he found small satisfaction in doing it well. Every floor polished, every trash can emptied, every restroom cleaned properly gave him a quiet sense of pride. People rarely noticed him, and that was fine. He didn't need recognition to know he was doing good work. He just wanted to live honestly and take care of himself the best he could. Across the city, Lisa was waking up as well. She was a single mother in her late 20s, and every day felt like a battle to survive. Her small apartment was cramped with peeling paint and a faint smell of damp, but it was home. She gently shook her daughter Mia awake. Mia was only 7 years old, bright-eyed and curious, but she had already learned to notice the worry in her mother's expressions. "Mom, are we going to be late for school again?" Mia asked, her voice sleepy but full of concern. Lisa forced a smile, hiding the panic she felt. "No, sweetie, we'll be on time. Let's get dressed quickly." She packed a small breakfast for Mia, some toast and a little bit of fruit, and helped her get ready. Lisa herself only had time for a quick bite before heading to work at the diner, where she did long hours for low pay. That morning, David caught the early train to the downtown office where he worked. The streets were crowded, filled with people rushing to their jobs. Some walked with a confident stride, talking on their phones or sipping expensive coffee, oblivious to the lives of those around them. David moved quietly through the crowd, invisible in many ways, but always watching, always aware. He noticed a homeless man huddled under a bridge, a mother struggling with her stroller, a young girl clutching a backpack that looked far too heavy for her. Each small scene reminded him that life was complicated for everyone, in different ways. When he arrived at the office building, the cleaning supplies were already lined up in the storage closet. He picked up his mop, bucket, and cleaning solution and began his routine. The lobby floors needed scrubbing, the elevators had fingerprints all over the glass, and the bathrooms were, as usual, in need of deep cleaning. David worked silently, methodically, moving through the building with care. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet satisfaction in seeing the space transformed by his effort. Meanwhile, Lisa and Mia were already facing their own challenges. At the local grocery store, Lisa checked her wallet and counted the money she had saved for the week. It wasn't enough to cover everything she needed. Mia tugged at her hand, asking for a small snack, and Lisa's heart ached. She tried to explain gently, "Not today, sweetie. We have to be careful with money." Mia nodded, but her eyes betrayed her disappointment. Every decision Lisa made felt like a compromise, a balancing act between survival and giving her daughter even a little bit of joy. After finishing his shift, David felt the familiar exhaustion settle into his bones. His clothes were damp with sweat and his back ached from bending and lifting all day. He counted the money in his wallet again. $50, that's all he had until the next paycheck. He could barely buy groceries with that, let alone cover any unexpected expenses. Still, he held his head high, reminding himself that life was about perseverance, not complaints. That evening, as David walked home, the streets were wet from a sudden rainstorm. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and noticed a woman and a little girl standing near a convenience store, shivering and struggling to pay for a few groceries. Lisa's hand shook as she counted her bills, and Mia clung to her side, worried and confused. David hesitated for a moment. He felt the tug of empathy, knowing that his own wallet was nearly empty, but something inside him told him to act. He stepped closer and said softly, "Excuse me. Can I help?" Lisa looked up, surprised. David handed her the $50 he had just counted. "Take care of yourselves," he said, smiling gently. There was no expectation, no request for repayment. It was a simple act, but for Lisa and Mia it was everything. Lisa's eyes welled up with tears and Mia's jaw dropped in amazement. "Are you sure?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. David nodded. "Yes, take it. You'll be okay." After that, David continued walking home, feeling an unusual lightness in his chest despite having less money. He thought about how small gestures could carry great weight. Meanwhile, Lisa and Mia were able to pay for their groceries and bills, their relief palpable. That night, as Lisa tucked Mia into bed, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the stranger who had helped them. Mia, still wide-eyed, asked, "Mom, will there always be kind people like him?" Lisa smiled, holding her daughter close. "Yes, sweetie. Sometimes they appear when you need them most." David, alone in his small apartment, sipped the last of his cold coffee and thought about the day. He didn't know that this simple act of generosity would set off a chain of events that would touch not only Lisa and Mia, but countless others. For now, all he knew was that he had done what he felt was right, and that was enough. He went to bed that night tired but with a sense of quiet pride. Life was still hard and David still had bills to pay and meals to plan carefully. But something inside him felt different. That day had reminded him that even the smallest acts of kindness could make a difference. And while the world often felt cold and uncaring, there were moments, rare, shining moments where compassion could light the way for someone struggling to survive. For Lisa and Mia, that evening became a story they would tell again and again, a memory of a stranger's generosity that carried them through the hardest times. For David, it was a reminder that even when you have little, giving a little can mean the world to someone else. And so life went on, quietly weaving together the lives of people who had never met, linked by a simple act of human kindness that neither would ever forget. The next morning, David woke up with the faint hum of the city outside his window. His body still ached from the long hours of cleaning the day before, but something inside him felt lighter, almost as if a small weight had been lifted. He poured his usual cup of coffee and sat by the small kitchen table, looking out at the streets below. He thought about the woman and her daughter from yesterday, their faces, their surprise, the quiet relief that had shone in their eyes. David didn't think about recognition or reward. He didn't expect them to remember him, and he certainly didn't expect anything to change in his own life. Yet as he got ready for work, he felt a strange warmth, a sense that even a small gesture could ripple outward in ways he might never fully understand. Meanwhile, across town, Lisa and Mia were already awake, energized by a sense of hope they hadn't felt in weeks. Lisa still couldn't believe what had happened the day before. The $50 had allowed her to pay overdue bills and buy enough groceries to last for the week. It wasn't just the money, it was the reminder that someone cared, even a stranger. She watched Mia eat her breakfast with more enthusiasm than usual, noticing the small spark of happiness in her daughter's eyes. "You know, Mom," Mia said as she buttered her toast, "he was really kind. I hope I can be like him one day." Lisa smiled, realizing that her daughter had already begun learning one of life's most important lessons, that kindness mattered more than anything else. David's day at work was much like any other. The cleaning was exhausting, and the office workers came and went, mostly unaware of the effort it took to maintain the building. Still, David moved with purpose, careful in his work, finding small satisfaction in seeing the lobby shine and the floors polished. He found peace in the rhythm of his tasks, a quiet meditation that allowed him to forget, if only briefly, the hardships of his own life. After his shift, he decided to take a different route home. The streets were busier than usual, filled with people rushing to catch buses or taxis, hurrying past each other without a glance. Yet in the midst of the chaos, David spotted Lisa and Mia again. They were standing outside a small corner store, trying to manage their groceries and the weight of their bills. David paused for a moment, unsure if he should intervene again. His wallet was almost empty, and he had just enough to feed himself for a few days. But something inside him stirred, a quiet, insistent feeling that he could not ignore. Without overthinking it, he approached them. "Hey," he said softly, "do you need a hand?" Lisa looked up, startled to see him again. There was a mix of relief and hesitation in her eyes. We're fine, thank you," she said cautiously. David noticed the exhaustion in her voice, the faint worry lines etched on her face, and he knew she wasn't entirely fine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last $50 he had, handing it to her once more. "Take it," he said simply. "It's just a little help. I know it's not much, but it can make a difference." Lisa's eyes widened, tears brimming as she looked at him. Mia clung to her mother's side, her small hands trembling as she whispered, "Thank you, sir." David nodded, smiling gently. "You're welcome. Just take care of each other." As he walked away, David felt an unfamiliar sensation, a deep, quiet satisfaction that warmed him from the inside out. He knew that money wasn't the only thing he was giving. He was giving hope, reassurance, and a reminder that even in difficult times, people could care for one another. Lisa and Mia returned home, still in shock at what had just happened. The groceries they now had were enough to last a few weeks, and the overdue bills had been paid. But more importantly, they carried a renewed sense of hope. Lisa sat down with Mia at the kitchen table, both of them quietly savoring a simple dinner that now felt like a small celebration. "I can't believe someone would do that for us," Lisa said, shaking her head. "We didn't even know him." Mia looked up at her mother, eyes wide. "Mom, do you think there are other people like him?" Lisa smiled, realizing that this experience had already begun to shape her daughter's understanding of the world. "Yes, sweetie, there are. And one day maybe we can help someone too." Meanwhile, David continued his life quietly. He worked his long hours, cleaned the floors and bathrooms, and went home to his small apartment. He didn't talk about what he had done, and he didn't need to. The satisfaction of knowing he had helped someone was enough. But as days went by, he began to notice subtle changes. People in his neighborhood seemed to smile at him more. Colleagues at work greeted him with genuine warmth, and even strangers on the street offered polite nods and small words of kindness. It was as if the small act he had done had created a ripple, touching lives in ways he could not immediately see. David didn't think of himself as a hero. He was simply a man doing what he felt was right, following his conscience, and trying to make the world a little brighter in the limited way he could. For Lisa and Mia, life continued with a newfound sense of possibility. Lisa found herself more confident at work, taking on extra shifts and exploring new opportunities. She spoke often about the stranger who had helped them, sharing the story with friends and coworkers who were moved by his generosity. Mia, inspired by the act of kindness she had witnessed, began helping others in small ways, sharing her toys with friends, helping her teacher in class, and showing compassion to her classmates. One afternoon, Lisa visited the local community center to attend a workshop on parenting and family support. She spoke with other parents, sharing her story of how a stranger's simple act had changed their week, their spirits, and their outlook on life. People were deeply touched, and several asked how they could help others in their community. Lisa realized that kindness was contagious, and she wanted to ensure that the spark David had started would grow and spread. David, unaware of the growing impact of his actions, continued to move quietly through his days. He noticed small things, the way people smiled at him, the polite greetings from neighbors, the occasional compliment from someone who had seen his hard work. It wasn't fame or recognition, but it was a reminder that small gestures mattered, that they could influence the lives of others in meaningful ways. Even in moments of exhaustion, when his body ached and his wallet was nearly empty, David found strength in the thought that kindness had power. It didn't require money, influence, or status. It required only the willingness to see someone else's struggle and do what little one could to help. And sometimes that little was everything. That week, Lisa and Mia continued to adjust to their new circumstances. Bills were paid, groceries were stocked, and for the first time in a long while, they could breathe without constant fear of what would happen next. Lisa often thought of David and wondered if he truly understood the impact he had made. She hoped that somehow he knew, though she doubted it. To her, he had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that human kindness could shine even in the darkest moments. David, in his quiet apartment, prepared for another day. He didn't have much, and life was far from easy, but he felt a quiet joy, a sense of connection to the people around him that he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. He thought about Lisa and Mia, hoping that they were safe, fed, and happy. That hope, however small, gave him strength, and so life moved forward. David cleaned the offices, worked the late shifts, and returned to his apartment each night tired but fulfilled. Lisa and Mia navigated their challenges with renewed hope, carrying the memory of a stranger's generosity with them. The city around them continued its noisy, busy rhythm, but within these small lives, quiet miracles were happening, proof that even the smallest act of kindness could have far-reaching consequences. In those quiet moments, David sometimes wondered if the world was capable of more goodness. He realized that even a single act, done without expectation, could ignite hope in the hearts of strangers, change the course of their days and perhaps even their future. And that thought alone was enough to make every exhausting hour, every long walk, and every dollar spent feel meaningful. Days passed after the rainy afternoon when David had given Lisa and Mia his last $50. Life for David continued as usual, long shifts cleaning offices, wiping floors, emptying trash, and polishing windows. He often moved quietly through the buildings, unnoticed by the busy office workers who were too absorbed in their own lives to notice him. He didn't mind. David had long accepted that his work was humble, that his life was modest, but that didn't stop him from feeling a deep sense of satisfaction when he saw spaces he had cleaned sparkle under the fluorescent lights. Yet, even as he carried on, David began to notice subtle changes around him. Small gestures of acknowledgement appeared, like a brief smile from a security guard, a polite thank you from a receptionist, or someone holding the elevator for him. He didn't think much of it at first, but over time, he realized that these small acknowledgments were a gentle reminder that people noticed kindness, even when it wasn't directly for them. Across town, Lisa and Mia were adjusting to their week with a sense of cautious relief. The $50 David had given them had solved immediate problems. Groceries were stocked, bills were paid, and Mia could enjoy a simple breakfast without the worry of what would come next. But beyond the material relief, something deeper had shifted in Lisa's heart. She had experienced a moment of genuine compassion from a stranger, and it had reminded her that human beings could still care for one another in a world that often felt harsh and indifferent. Lisa found herself sharing the story with her friends at work, telling them about the man who had helped them when they needed it most. Her co-workers were moved, and some even said they had never seen anything so selfless. A few joked that David must be a superhero in disguise, but Lisa laughed softly, knowing that he wasn't looking for recognition or praise. What mattered was the effect of his kindness, not his acknowledgement of it. Mia listened intently as her mother spoke, asking questions about why someone would help people they didn't even know. Lisa smiled and explained, "Sometimes people do good things just because it feels right, sweetie. That's the kind of person David is." Meanwhile, David's own reflections often returned to Lisa and Mia. He didn't know their full story, but he wondered how they were managing. Whether they were able to eat well, pay their bills, and keep a sense of stability in their lives. He carried a quiet hope that the money had helped them, but he never expected to hear from them again. It was enough to know that he had done what he could. One morning, while David was cleaning a busy office floor, he overheard a conversation between two office workers discussing community events. They were talking about people helping each other in unexpected ways, about small acts of generosity that had ripple effects. David paused, listening carefully, and realized that the story being shared was about him, about the man who had helped a single mother and her daughter when they were struggling. He felt a mixture of surprise and discomfort. He had never seen himself as someone noteworthy, and the idea that his actions were being celebrated felt strange. Meanwhile, Lisa's life began to take subtle turns for the better. The help she had received allowed her to focus more on finding better opportunities. She started applying for jobs that paid more than her current part-time work at the diner. She felt more confident, knowing that she had been supported in a time of need. Mia, too, was thriving. She went to school with a lighter heart, focused on her lessons, and even began participating more in classroom activities. Lisa noticed the change in her daughter and realized that stability, even if temporary, could make a lasting difference in a child's development. One afternoon, Lisa visited a small local charity organization to ask about programs for single mothers. She shared her story, the unexpected help from David, the relief it had provided, and how it had motivated her to keep going despite the odds. The staff were deeply touched. They told her that her story might inspire others to help, and they encouraged her to continue sharing it. Lisa left with a sense of purpose, realizing that her experience could have meaning beyond her own life. David, unaware of these developments, continued his daily routine. Cleaning floors, wiping counters, and emptying trash was a rhythm that defined his life. He often thought about the broader meaning of kindness and generosity. He remembered the faces of Lisa and Mia, their initial surprise, their cautious hope, and the gratitude in their eyes. David understood that money alone was not what mattered. It was the gesture, the recognition that someone else's life mattered enough to act, that created true impact. As the days turned into weeks, small changes began to ripple outward. Lisa's co-workers, inspired by her story, started to consider their own capacity to help others. Mia, inspired by the generosity she had witnessed, began showing more thoughtfulness to her classmates. Even neighbors who heard about the story began offering small assistance to those around them. A loaf of bread here, a ride to work there, a few spare dollars for someone in need. David had never intended for his actions to have such influence, but the results were undeniable. One evening, as David walked home after a long day, he noticed Lisa and Mia again. This time they were walking along the sidewalk, chatting quietly. Lisa waved to him and he nodded, smiling faintly. There was no awkwardness, no expectation, just a shared acknowledgement that their lives had briefly intersected in a meaningful way. David felt a quiet warmth in his chest. He didn't know how much they were struggling now, or if the money he had given had made a lasting impact, but seeing them in good spirits reminded him that small acts of kindness could be powerful. Lisa and Mia continued to navigate the challenges of daily life with renewed strength. Lisa applied for new jobs and interviewed at local businesses, hoping to find something that offered stability and growth. Mia, motivated by the kindness she had experienced, continued to perform well in school. She asked her mother about the importance of helping others, and Lisa took the opportunity to teach her daughter lessons about compassion, empathy, and responsibility. David, meanwhile, was quietly becoming a local example of generosity. People who worked in the offices he cleaned began noticing his consistent work ethic and his quiet, humble demeanor. Some mentioned to their friends or family the man who had helped a struggling mother and her daughter, not as a story of heroism, but as a reminder that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences in someone's life. David didn't know that his actions had started a small movement, a chain of compassion that would continue long after he finished his shift. The weeks continued with a steady rhythm. David worked, Lisa explored new job opportunities, and Mia thrived in school. Every now and then, Lisa would look at her daughter and smile, thinking about how one small gesture had shifted the course of their lives. She didn't know how to thank David properly, and she doubted he would accept any recognition. But she carried the memory of his generosity with her, a constant reminder that even in the hardest times, people could show incredible kindness. For David, life remained challenging, but his spirit felt lighter. The long hours, the aching muscles, and the modest pay no longer felt like burdens. They felt like part of a life lived with purpose. Even though he didn't have much, he had found a way to touch lives, and that knowledge gave him strength to continue. And so the quiet ripple continued. Lisa and Mia grew more confident and hopeful. David continued to live his humble life with dignity and care. The small acts of kindness began to influence others in subtle ways. Neighbors helping neighbors, co-workers showing more patience, children learning to share and care for one another. The world around them moved quickly, often indifferent to struggles and victories. But within these small, intertwined lives, a story of hope and compassion was quietly unfolding. By the end of this part, the reader sees how one act of generosity can expand beyond immediate circumstances, touching multiple lives and inspiring others without the giver even realizing it. It sets the stage for bigger changes and more life-altering events in the coming parts. Weeks had passed since David had helped Lisa and Mia with his last $50, but the memory of that day lingered in both their minds. For David, life continued, with its usual routine. Long shifts cleaning offices, mopping floors, emptying trash, and polishing windows. He often returned home exhausted, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he had made a difference, however small, in the lives of a mother and her daughter. Lisa's life, meanwhile, was slowly beginning to shift. The money David had given her had not only covered immediate needs but had given her hope, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. With renewed confidence, she started applying for better-paying jobs, determined to create a more stable life for Mia. Each interview brought anxiety, but also excitement. She realized that someone had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, and it gave her the courage to keep trying even when doors seemed to close one after another. One afternoon, Lisa visited a local community center she had never gone to before. She had heard that they provided assistance for single mothers, offering job training, educational support, and sometimes financial help. Lisa was nervous as she entered the modest building, unsure if she would be welcomed or judged. But the staff greeted her warmly, asking her about her situation and listening carefully. She shared the story of David, the man who had helped her when she needed it most, and explained how it had given her the strength to keep going. The staff were deeply touched. They told her that her story might inspire others, and they began explaining programs that could support her and Mia. They offered to help Lisa find a better job, provide guidance on managing finances, and even suggested educational programs for Mia to ensure she had opportunities to thrive. Lisa left the center feeling lighter than she had in months, a small spark of hope igniting inside her heart. Meanwhile, David continued his work without realizing the full impact of his generosity. One evening, as he cleaned an office floor, he overheard a conversation between two employees about community heroes. They were talking about a man who had helped a struggling single mother and her daughter in a moment of kindness. David paused, recognizing the story as his own, and a mixture of surprise and humility washed over him. He had never considered himself a hero, but hearing others speak of his actions in such a positive way filled him with quiet pride. The ripple effect of his kindness began to expand further. Lisa secured a new job with better hours and pay. The financial relief allowed her to move into a slightly larger apartment, one with brighter walls and a little more space for Mia to play. For the first time in a long while, Lisa could breathe without constant fear of falling behind on bills. Mia noticed the change too. She no longer worried about whether they would have enough to eat or if her mother would be able to pay the rent. Her energy returned and her curiosity about the world grew. The community center continued to support Lisa and Mia, providing educational resources, mentoring, and guidance. Mia began attending a tutoring program that helped her with reading and math. The small improvements in her learning gave her confidence, and she began to excel in school. Lisa, inspired by these positive changes, became more determined to create a life that offered stability, security, and opportunities for her daughter. David, though unaware of the direct consequences of his actions, noticed subtle changes in his own world as well. People began to greet him with kindness more often, sometimes offering small gestures of appreciation for his hard work. It wasn't the money or recognition he sought, but it reminded him that small acts of care mattered. Even in his modest life, these gestures created a sense of connection and community that had previously felt absent. One day, Lisa and Mia returned to the community center for a special event. The staff invited them to share their story with other single mothers and families struggling in similar ways. Lisa nervously recounted the day David had helped them, the last $50 he had given without expectation, and how that act of generosity had inspired her to keep moving forward. She spoke about the hope it gave her and the way it changed her perspective on life. Mia stood by her mother's side, holding her hand, and her bright eyes reflected the pride and happiness she felt. The audience at the community center listened quietly, many wiping tears from their eyes. Several mothers came up afterward to thank Lisa for sharing, expressing how they too had faced moments of despair but now felt inspired to keep trying. The ripple effect of David's kindness had expanded far beyond the single act of giving money. It had motivated others to act with compassion and support one another in small but meaningful ways. Meanwhile, David's own life continued with its rhythm, though a quiet sense of fulfillment grew inside him. He cleaned offices day after day, worked late shifts, and returned home to his small apartment. Sometimes he thought about Lisa and Mia and hoped they were doing well. Other times, he reflected on the simple power of kindness, realizing that even the smallest act could have lasting consequences. He didn't need recognition or reward. The satisfaction of knowing he had helped someone in need was enough. As the weeks turned into months, Lisa's life continued to improve. She had a steady job, a safer apartment, and the ability to provide Mia with opportunities she hadn't had before. Mia flourished in school, participating in extracurricular activities and making new friends. Lisa made a point to teach Mia about kindness, compassion, and the importance of helping others whenever possible. She told her daughter that even a small act could change someone's life, just as David had changed theirs. David remained humble, carrying on with his work and daily routines. He noticed small acts of kindness from others, sometimes in response to his own behavior and sometimes independently. People began to recognize him as someone who quietly made a difference in the community. Office workers complimented his diligence. Neighbors offered friendly greetings, and some even reached out to help him in small ways. It wasn't the same as what he had done for Lisa and Mia, but it reflected the way kindness can circulate through a community, often in unexpected ways. Lisa and Mia's lives had been fundamentally altered, not just by the financial help, but by the lesson it taught them, that there are good people in the world, people who act selflessly and care deeply about others. It was a lesson that stayed with Lisa as she worked hard to build a better life, and it shaped Mia as she grew up to be thoughtful, empathetic, and determined to help others whenever she could. One afternoon, David returned home after a long day, exhausted but content. He looked out the window at the quiet city streets, reflecting on the chain of events that had begun with a simple decision to give his last $50. He didn't know the full extent of the impact, but he felt a quiet sense of purpose. In his modest apartment with the hum of the heater and distant sounds of traffic, he understood that the true value of life was not in money or possessions, but in the ability to care for others and act when it mattered most. As the story unfolded, the connections between lives became clearer. David's quiet generosity had set in motion opportunities that Lisa and Mia might never have had otherwise. The ripple effect of kindness extended beyond them, touching neighbors, co-workers, and other families who were inspired by the story. Each act of compassion, no matter how small, reinforced the importance of human connection and the power of selflessness. By the end of this part, Lisa and Mia were thriving, and David's life, though humble, carried a quiet richness that could not be measured in dollars. The stage was now set for the final part, where the full impact of David's generosity would become even more evident, showing how one small act can truly change lives and leave a lasting legacy. Time had passed since David had given Lisa and Mia his last $50, and life had quietly shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. For David, the routine remained the same: long days cleaning offices, mopping floors, and emptying trash. Yet there was a deeper sense of purpose now, a subtle warmth in his heart that had grown with the knowledge that even small acts of kindness could ripple far beyond the moment. Lisa and Mia's lives had transformed dramatically. The assistance and hope that David's gesture had sparked gave Lisa the courage to continue pursuing stability and opportunity. She now had a steady job with decent pay, allowing her to move into a small apartment with more space and sunlight than the cramped unit she had lived in before. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe without fear, knowing that she could provide for her daughter. Mia thrived in school, her curiosity and confidence blossoming. She participated in classes, excelled in reading and math, and even joined a small art club at her school, something Lisa had never imagined possible during their days of struggle. One afternoon, Lisa and Mia visited the community center that had supported them through their transition. They had become familiar faces there, participating in programs that not only helped them but allowed them to inspire others. Lisa shared her story with other parents, explaining how a stranger's act of generosity had changed their lives and encouraged them to persevere. Mothers and fathers listened intently, some wiping tears from their eyes, others nodding in quiet agreement. The story of the man who had given his last $50 became a symbol of hope in their small community, proof that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences in the lives of others. David continued his life with quiet humility. He remained the same man who walked the city streets with worn shoes, cleaned floors, and returned to his small apartment at night. He didn't consider himself a hero and never sought recognition. But sometimes when he passed the grocery store where he had first met Lisa and Mia, he noticed a mother and daughter waving or smiling, and he felt a small, warm satisfaction in his chest. He understood that life's true rewards were not measured in money or praise, but in the knowledge that he had made someone's life better, even in a modest way. One evening, Lisa received an invitation from the community center. They were hosting a special event to celebrate acts of kindness in the community and wanted her to attend. She thought about David immediately, wondering if she should invite him. She knew he might not come, but she wanted him to understand the impact he had made. She wrote a small note and handed it to him the next time she saw him, explaining how much his gesture had meant to them and inviting him to the event. David read the note quietly, a small smile forming on his lips. He didn't need any recognition, but he decided to attend, curious to see how the story had grown beyond what he had imagined. At the event, David saw Lisa and Mia again, now dressed neatly and smiling brightly. When Lisa introduced him to others, she spoke passionately about how his simple act of generosity had given them hope, inspiration, and the courage to move forward. Mia stood by her mother, beaming, and told the audience in her small, clear voice, "He helped us when we had nothing. He showed us that people care." There were quiet murmurs of admiration throughout the room, and some people even stood to clap, touched by the story of a man who had given without expecting anything in return. David felt overwhelmed, though not in the way most would expect. He wasn't used to attention or praise. He had simply done what felt right in the moment. Yet, seeing the happiness on Lisa and Mia's faces, hearing how their lives had changed because of something he had done, he realized the full power of human kindness. One small act, done without expectation, had created a ripple effect that reached far beyond what he could have imagined. After the event, Lisa and Mia walked with David through the streets of the city. They spoke quietly, reflecting on how much their lives had changed. Lisa explained how the stability allowed her to pursue education and career opportunities she had never thought possible. Mia excitedly talked about her school projects, her friends, and even small ways she tried to help others in her class. David listened, smiling softly, understanding that the effects of his generosity had extended into the smallest and largest corners of their lives. David's own life continued quietly, but now it carried a sense of connection that had been missing before. People in the neighborhood and at work began recognizing him, not just as a cleaner but as someone who embodied selflessness and integrity. He noticed others trying to help one another, small acts of kindness spreading through the community like tiny sparks lighting the way. Sometimes it was a neighbor offering food to someone in need, a coworker sharing a kind word, or a child helping a friend at school. David understood that while he had started the ripple, many others were now adding their own touches, creating a chain of goodwill that strengthened their community. Lisa and Mia also became part of this growing ripple. Inspired by David's generosity, they volunteered at the community center, helping other families who were struggling. Lisa used her experience to mentor single mothers, sharing practical advice and encouragement, while Mia helped children with homework and offered small acts of kindness to those around her. They had learned the true meaning of giving, not only in receiving help but in passing it forward, ensuring that kindness continued to flow from one person to another. For David, life was still modest. He continued working long hours, cleaning office floors and emptying trash, living simply in his small apartment. But he now understood that the true measure of life was not in wealth or possessions, but in the impact one could have on the lives of others. Even the smallest gestures mattered, and every act of kindness had the potential to inspire, heal, and transform lives. Years later, Mia grew into a confident young woman. She often spoke about David, the man who had changed her life through a simple act of generosity, and how it had inspired her to become a compassionate and thoughtful person. Lisa pursued opportunities that allowed her to build a stable, fulfilling life, always carrying the lessons of kindness and gratitude in her heart. David, though never seeking recognition, remained quietly at the center of this web of impact. He continued his work, helping others in small ways wherever he could, whether it was offering a helping hand, listening to someone in need, or simply sharing a smile. He understood that life was not about the recognition one received, but about the lives one touched and the hope one inspired. The story of David, Lisa and Mia became a quiet legend in their community, a testament to the power of generosity and selflessness. People shared the story in schools, community centers, and workplaces, not to glorify David, but to remind everyone,